Thanks so much for listening. Before getting into today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that I would love to add value to you, your organization, and those you serve through speaking, training, professional development, or coaching. Over the last year, I've been fortunate to work with those in higher education, pre-K 12, and more recently, the corporate space. To learn more, visit my website at cjleadership.com or send me an email at chris@cjleadership.com. I can't wait to hear from you, and now on to our episode. Welcome to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast, where the goal is to improve organizations and serve students one leader at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Jochum. If you're a department chair in higher education or any type of educational leader and you want to improve yourself to better serve and influence those you lead, you've come to the right place, because the best way to improve an organization is to improve its leader. Let's get started. Welcome back, friends, to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. Always so appreciative that you take time out of your busy day to improve yourself as a leader. I'm very excited to have a department chair with us today who just wrote a wonderful book that I know you're going to want on your shelf or in your digital shelf, as many of us do now. I'm joined today by Dr. Benjamin Myers. Ben is a professor of communication and the chair of the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Toledo. He teaches classes such as organizational communication, professional business communication, small group communication, and communication theory. He is the co-editor of the book Critical Administration in Higher Education, Negotiating Political Commitment and Managerial Practice, and the author of the brand new book with Rowman and Littlefield, The New Department Chair, 100 Daily Reflections for Mindfully Designing Your Term. This book is not a how-to, but instead an innovation to reflexively engage on the unique challenges and opportunities of academic middle management. So, Ben, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you being on the show. It's always great when a colleague in the field recognizes a need that we need more literature, more materials out there to train chairs. It can be very rewarding, but at the same time, as we know, there isn't as much training as we would like. And more specifically, what you have done is you have taken an approach that I see as being a very one-on-one, personable, I'm here to mentor you perhaps on a daily basis, because this book, when he says 100 reflections, it is very digestible, if you would say, very, very bite-sized. And not only is it something that you could read sequentially, but you can go to the table of contents, and I promise you, whatever you're struggling with, you're going to be able to find something, and it's going to hit you different. You might read it now, come back, read it again in a year, and with some experience under your belt, it's still going to add value. So let's just get to it, Ben. I want our listeners to be able to understand the great things in this book and get this book. The link will be in the show notes. So why don't you just talk to us about what led to this book. You've been at multiple institutions. You've been a chair over a decade, more than qualified to write this. For us, luckily, what led to you writing this book?
Thank you. It's a very flattering introduction. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm really, really excited about this project. It's been years in the making. I could talk about this kind of content, as far as what I'm trying to get at with the book, as far as the content, but then also the format as well. So, do you have a preference which order I take that in, Chris?
Hey, you're the author. You go for it.
Okay, I'll start with content then. I've been doing this for 12 consecutive years now at three different places. And each stop along the way, you kind of realize something. When I first when I started as chair in my first station, you just kind of assume, oh, this is what a department chair is. Then, I went to my second, uh, place and realized, oh, there are some things that people do really differently. There's not just one thing that being a department chair is. Um, and then by the time I got to the third one, here at the University of Toledo, I'm like, oh, like being chair is very different at very different places. Um, and so this idea of like a how-to approach, I just thought like, no, what I really want to do is be more about inviting opportunities for people to reflect on kind of the particular challenges and vulnerabilities, but also opportunities that are associated with being a department chair. Because you know, I it's a lot of work and you should be able to find some like reward out of it. And often we don't think that. I use this, I use this early on in one of the chapters. When I found this weird experience where, when I told my family, like, hey, I'm going to be, a chair, they would have taken me out to dinner. They were proud of me, right? My mom was so excited, right? When I told my colleagues, they acted like I had told them I had a disease of some kind, like I had just been diagnosed. It was condolences and apologies and questions. And I thought, okay, there's something going on here whereby, we are not within the academy, we realized that these are often challenging positions. And I was interested in thinking through how can we kind of find rewards out of that. Also along the way is I, got my MBA. I teach organizational communication, that's, what I have my degree in, but thought, oh, I'm going to return back. And I graduated in 2021 and go be a student again, which I thought was, the experience of being a student might make me a good teacher, but also I was interested in learning some of the kind of like the operational quote unquote hard skills that might be associated with management. And I thought this is going to, make me a better chair. And I was struck in my management classes about, like how little of what I was learning was actually applicable to being a department chair. And, having conversations with my fellow, colleagues and students in the program, who are also many of them, mid-career managers. I realize what we do is weird. Department chairs have the weirdest managerial position. Um, a lot of the levers that traditional managers have, we just don't have as department chairs. And you're still expected to produce managerial results without the abilities to promote people, fire people, give people raises, right? It's all got to be, I mean, there are certainly little ways that you can motivate and incentivize people, but the structure of higher ed is set up whereby your managerial authority is must it's hindered in a lot of ways, actually. And like I said, I think that's by design, right? I mean, we're often pretty distrustful of folks who find themselves in these positions, which once again, I think is why, you had a guest on a couple episodes ago talking about reluctant chairs. I think that's why we're often expected to perform reluctance in these positions, is so no one gets too suspicious of you. You got to pretend like you don't want it. But so that's kind of the content side. I got interested in exploring why that is. As far as the formats side of things, when I first became chair, I was given a book, right? It was the College Administrator Survival Guide. It was on day one when I stepped into I stepped into my office on day one, and it was from the provost, and it was wrapped, and I opened it. Um, and I just felt this sense of like, okay, I'm like learning new softwares. I'm learning like how to do, like run graduation reports. I'm all of a sudden, my inbox has blown up, and now I'm supposed to read this book on top of this, and it just felt very overwhelming. Um, and so I like the idea of making this a little bit more digestible. So 100 chapters that are all somewhere in the 1,000 to 1,500 word range, that are informed by the surprising amount of research that's out there. Honestly, I was when I dug into this, I didn't realize how much research there was on being department chair. Um, but I also found that there's not much work out there connecting some of that academic research to managerial practice. So I was interested in that. And also, I grew up very religious. Daily devotions was a part of my life growing up, and so I'm a big fan. While I'm not particularly religious these days, I'm a big fan of the devotional format. Um, that, none of these chapters are meant to be the end all be all, like, of how you should think about these things. They're instead like, here's like experiences that I've had. Here's research that might inform our understanding of those experiences. And then, I end every chapter with reflection questions, right? Um, and like I said, being chair is different at different places. I don't assume every chapter is applicable to every single chair because every chair at every university is position is different. But the reflection questions, if it's not applicable to you, I think that's worth reflecting on, right? Why is Ben's experience different than mine here? And what does that tell me about my institution? Um, and then finally, kind of the framing metaphor of this, I say mindfully designing your term. Um, is kind of a direct counterpoint to that survival metaphor that I mentioned, right? If I'd encourage your listeners, go type in the words, in quotes, department chair and then survival and see how many hits you get on Google, right? That metaphor is everywhere, right? Surviving your term as chair, right? How to survive your term as department chair. Um, well, I'm not really interested in surviving. I'm interested in thriving. We don't make our best decisions, right? When we're in survival mode, right? um, I get the like put your own mask on before helping your person in the seat next to you. No, survival is panic. It's treading water. I'm interested in mindfully designing um, and moving out of that kind of survival mode. And so the digestible approach to this with reflection questions is meant to really do that.
Well, thank you. And I will just emphasize that for our listeners. I really like, certainly from an academic standpoint, is the reflection questions. You have a built-in book study, all right, either for yourself, your colleagues on campus, if you have some people in your social, your social network. And then the other nice thing is under each of the reflections, you list a handful of references that do support the literature, but sometimes, as you said, we need to connect that to daily practice. And I really like what you do there. Right off in chapter one, you say the most difficult part of the new position is likely the radical repositioning in your organization and professional identity. You go on to say many of the things that make you a good faculty member will not make you a good chair. And I think we take that along with what you said. I love your analogy. Your family was saying congratulations. Your colleagues were saying condolences.
Yeah.
So there's two different sides to it. I
I
would,
feel like most
yeah,
chairs I talk to have that
they
experience
do,
too.
yeah. And I think we would both agree to our listeners. If you pursue it for the right reasons with the right mindset, it can be very, very rewarding. It's still challenging. So let's just go off of that, Ben. Is you've done this for 12 years at three different institutions. You clearly have the consistency and the clarity of being a great leader, a great chair across different landscapes. Um, what are some things in the book that you touch on that you think really highlight some areas that if people are struggling or looking at going into this, what are some of the areas that you're most proud of that are going to really help them? Either way, if they're on the fence, maybe it's not right for them, but if they have the correct mindset and are willing to give up to go up, it might be that nudge that they need to have the confidence to move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're right there talking about that framing of kind of that radical repositioning and identity. Um, and I think that's the impetus for a lot of this. I opened the intro with a story about my first department meeting that I ever had. And I, found myself, interestingly, I was roped into being chair pretty early. I shouldn't use that language, roped in. I was offered the invitation by a group of senior faculty who said, "Hey Ben, we think you're the right person for this." And it was when like I hadn't even received tenure yet. I was up the process of going up for tenure. And it was a large, complex department, right? I mean, it was fine arts and communication studies, so it was theater, art, music, communication, art education, all that. So, which to say it was complex. And I thought, oh, as a first gig when I'm still pretty new at this and feeling my way around, I felt a little apprehensive, but I'm a, let's try it kind of person. So, thought, let's do it. And when I sat in that first department meeting, I had a full-blown panic attack. Um, and, I stood there like holding my agenda. I got through about 5 or 10 minutes of it. And, we had 20 or so faculty and staff who were there. I showed up to my first department meeting thinking like, okay, okay, like I got this, right? Like moving up in the world, right? And I like froze. I completely froze and like lost my ability to speak. Now I teach public speaking. I've seen this happen with students plenty of times. I had never been on the other side of that. Public speaking is something that I tend to be pretty comfortable with. But I you know, felt like I was having an out of body experience. I had to leave the room. And my assistant chair took over the meeting for me. I took a few minutes, I splashed some water in my face in the bathroom, came back in the room and tried to take over. But it was a pretty humbling experience. And it led me to really think about like, what is it that I'm reacting to in this moment? And it took me years to really understand what that was, right? I mean, in the moment, like I wasn't in a place to be able to do that. Looking back, I think I realized like I was doing something radically different. I had thought up to that point, being a department chair was like being a faculty member, but just with like a bigger bullhorn. And I realized standing up there, like, no, this is different. Like everyone's looking at me, and I'm the one leading the meeting at this point. And so that as I've been reflecting on that like over a couple of years, and it took me a while to get over that. I mean, obviously, like I said, it was humbling and it was a pretty traumatic little like event that I went through. But I'm actually pretty thankful for it 12 years later because I think it focused me in some kind of really important ways to think about what are some of the vulnerabilities and challenges associated with being chair. And then in the book, I go through a bunch of these kind of vulnerabilities. Um, and I know we had talked about a couple of them before we hopped on here. I'm happy to chat about those if you want, or
Well, yeah, what's one that sticks out? And I appreciate you using the word vulnerability. I always say that's a leader's superpower, is your ability, because the people we lead will see our shortcomings whether we admit it or not, and there's power. And what you did, I could not think of a better example or case study in leadership of having that, like you said, probably a panic attack,
yeah.
because you're like, oh, I'm the chair for real, and like you said, it isn't being a faculty member with a bigger bullhorn or a bigger office or a new title on your business card. And so, what were some of the things that you learned in terms of those vulnerabilities, and how did you clearly turn something that some people may have responded a lot differently, and 12 years down the road probably would not have been a chair for 12 years. So how did you turn that humbling experience into what has undoubtedly been a strength and made you a very effective chair?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of it is, I mean, I was 10 days into a 3-year term, so I had to keep doing it, right? I mean, I wasn't about to opt out 10 days into my term. Probably not a good career move. But, so after a while, like I said, you become a little more comfortable. I say it's like teaching. I remember when I first stepped into the classroom. I mean, it was scary. It was panicky. I felt like I had to have all the answers. Um, you become a lot more comfortable as chair after doing this a while, just like being a teacher of saying, oh, great question. I don't know the answer to that one. Well, let me look into it and circle back around. Um, so I think acknowledging that, and honestly, people, you know, no one likes a know-it-all, right? The know-it-all chairs are the ones that people, you know, tend to not be that successful. Having an ethos of curiosity, I think, goes a long way. Um, but I think I noticed this strain, this like thread of vulnerability really kind of throughout a lot of the particular challenges. Because, like I said, being chair is weird. Um, your term is fixed, everyone knows it. Um, you your relationship with your colleagues change. So, I mean, one interesting thing I found is, I've been chair at 3 different places now. moving like the first one, I was moved from faculty to the department chair position. My two subsequent positions, I've come in as an outside chair. It is much easier to come in as an outside chair than it is to get like, voted in as a faculty member. Because, I mean, you were the one sitting there complaining with your colleagues about the chair's decisions, and now all of a sudden you're the chair. You're, you, I worried about this thing. I don't want everyone to think I'm too big for my britches, for example, right? Like, I want to remain humble. Then I'm like, okay, like I feel even stupid, like worrying that people think I'm too big for my britches. And you get, you do some of that galaxy brain stuff, but you get really like, you can spiral out in that. Um, when you come in from the outside, that's all they know you as, your chair, right? And there's no kind of changing of relationship with your colleagues, which I think is where a lot of that vulnerability actually comes from. Um, and, but I mean, it is fixed, I mean, most chairs cycle back into faculty at some point. Which, there's literature out there that says, like chairs are very aware of that when they're doing their decision making, that someday the person you're saying no to might be on the other end of making decisions of requests that you have. And like I said, you don't have a lot of the traditional kind of managerial authority, right? You don't even have like kind of the like in a lot of spaces, the manager is the manager because they're the expert. Well, your staff and faculty all have advanced degrees and are really good at what they do usually. So I mean, you're not even, you're not even an expert in the space usually. All you really have is charisma or buy-in, right, or persuasion as a way to try to get people to buy into the vision that you have. And a lot of the vulnerabilities are associated with some of the challenges that you might have, right? For example, informational asymmetry, I think, is a huge one. Right? I found this to be so challenging when I moved into chairs. Like all of a sudden, I knew so much that I didn't know before. You know, um, Fights that people were having that were kept under wraps, right? Arguments that were long-standing that go way back, right? I share this story in the book, and this is another great thing. Like I've said, being at three different places, I can share stories because no one has to know where they came from. But I had a situation where an employee was, I got called in to IT office and walked into the office, and the sheriff and the provost and the head of IT are all sitting there in a room and saying, "Hey, we need to go over one of your department members, internet history," right? And I'll tell you, like, it made me very aware. It's like, oh, there's nothing more vulnerable than like the idea of going through someone's internet browsing history and seeing every little dumb link that someone's clicked on. But there was stuff that was problematic, right? And the fact that the sheriff was looped into this tells you some of the nature of what it was. Now, ultimately, they found that nothing illegal had happened, but the university felt it severe enough to put this person on administrative leave for a short while. Um, and I couldn't tell anyone what was happening, right? Department member disappears, right? And a well-liked department member who is also a woman. And then several folks started, people that I was friends with, right, started complaining and accusing me of somehow being involved in this, and right, that I didn't stand up for this person enough. And I just wanted like to say to everyone, right, like if you knew what I knew, trust me, you would not be standing up for this person. But I couldn't even, and I mean, obviously, given the nature of this, the person's not going to talk about what it is and say, trust Ben, right? And so it's just like these are the kind of situations like I felt really vulnerable, right? I'm at the center of this thing. I know this information, right? I mean, it made me vulnerable. And, I realized, okay, well, like that confidentiality and informational asymmetry is one of those vulnerabilities that you have to navigate as chair.
I love how you term that informational asymmetry. If you are listening to this and you have not yet been a chair, use that. I love that. He said, if you knew what I knew, assume positive intent because I can 100% back what Ben just said. The minute you go into the chair position, in some ways they pull back the curtain and
Uh,
you're like, Oh, I had no idea. Oh, that's why those two can't serve together. That's why those two, and in some ways we would not be doing our job with any level of integrity if we disclose that. But just know that your chair, your dean, your provost, they are carrying a bunch of information that honestly, their life would be easier if they could just tell you this, but they can't. We cannot. And I always say, in the absence of facts, the best story wins. So, in your mind, please assume positive intent and make that story, you know what? My chair, Ben's a good guy. I'll bet there's a reason he can't say anything, right? Because I found that too in the chair job, and I came in as an external, which again is easier. Shout out to those that are internal. That is a very hard process, and it takes a lot of courage. But thank you for pointing that out, because the indoctrination is truly okay. Here's the book of things that we can't talk about, but you need to know.
Yeah, well,
And
when I talked to some chairs before, when deciding whether to do it, and I was like, what do I need to be ready for? And they said, oh, get ready to learn a lot about your department. And I didn't realize just how true of a statement that was.
And what you said is being a leader in higher education, and I've heard people say this in and outside of higher ed, the chair job is one of the hardest jobs. It's also rewarding. But you said it isn't if you were the CEO of a bank and somebody's underperforming, you give them a performance plan, and if it doesn't work, for the most part, you can non-renew them.
Yeah.
Higher ed, and I'm not saying I'm against tenure and unions and things like that, but what I am saying is those are additional variables that
Mhm.
we have to consider. And so sometimes when I talk to leaders outside of higher ed, sharing concerns without giving too much information, well, why can't you just put them on a PIP and in a year? It doesn't work that way.
No,
We are akin to coaches that we have to play everyone on the team, right? We can't bench certain people,
a great
and just,
metaphor.
and so that's what I would say. No, you're a coach that has to play everybody. So you have to develop those relationships. You know, in addition to the informational asymmetry, I know in your book you also have a one of your 100 sections on academic bullies.
Oof.
And let's just talk about that. If you're in higher ed, we know they exist. What's your advice? What would you say for people listening that are going to get your book and they're going to learn more reading the book? But what just talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is any chair you talk to who's been doing it for more than a minute is going to tell you, you're like, oh, the bullying is just, one of the things that you need to sort through. I'll say this, like, so there's a big difference between, like difficult faculty and bullying, right? And I had to learn that, right? Pretty early on, right? You deal with the two very different, right? And I had to realize that. I mean, at first, like I had this weird idea when I got into chair that was like my job to make everyone get along, right? Like the interpersonally, it was my job to just make sure there's no conflict in the department, right? Um, and a lot of like conversations about thinking like, oh, right, if we just talk it out, right? Let's grab a beer together. I realize, some conflicts are not going to go away, and that's okay. It's healthy. It's not your job, right? It is your job to step in when there's bullying happening, 100%. And by bullying, what we mean there is, right, people who seem intent to cause chaos and exert power over people, to make themselves the center of attention, and who don't seem to have any concern for, the stray bullets, right? That happen as a result of their behavior, right? They don't care who catches one. And in fact, often catching one is one way that they often love to show off how influential that they actually are. And I echo your sentiment. Yeah, I'm all for tenure, all for unions, pro labor, right? The challenges are, how do you have these very important protections while keeping the bad actors from leveraging them in ways that are not productive to the team? And I mean, it's shocking how much energy and resource and morale one single bully can drain from a department. Um, so, I talk about the slippery slope of accommodation, which was a lesson I learned early on as being a chair of Um, I had this idea, first bully that I came across, the demands start small, and I knew they were wrong in my heart, right? Like I need this room changed, right? Like, because I can't, right, cross this other person in the hall, right? Because, like and I'm like, okay, easier to give in, easier to give in. She's gonna see I'm willing to work with her, right? And no, every single one you give in on just leads to a bigger demand. To the point, where demanding people are getting fired, and just creating general chaos all around. Um, and I mean, higher ed seems like built in some ways, like I said, to protect bullies, right? I mean, it's like the bureaucracy, right? That's there, things like the protections that are available. Um, it just it's hard. And being a chair is pivotal, right? I mean, honestly, some of the most rewarding things I've gone through as chair, right, like accomplishments, have been addressing bullying behavior. Um, and higher ed, right? This is not my term. I can't remember whose term it is. Um, Called like says about victim bullying seems to be like especially prevalent in higher education, right? you know, Bullying using the language of victimhood, right? Everyone's out to get me. Everything's against me. Every time you don't get special treatment, it's further confirmation of how persecuted and what a martyr the bully is. And leveraging every office that's there to actually help people and protect people towards their ends. Um, and I mean, what I have found is, I you got to go through it, I think, to get thick enough skin to do it. Um, but you're not going to change the behavior. For the longest time, I thought I can work with people, right? I can coach them, right? Some people are uncoachable, and you got to realize that, right? They're going to be bullies, and your focus has to change from stopping the behavior to mitigating its effects. Um, and you know, Boxing bullies in, right? Um, and once again, this language, it's not an excuse to just like wall off difficult faculty, right? Very different, right? You got to know when a bully is actually a bully. Um, and I think, bullies prey on fear. I mean, it's a lesson. I have a 5-year-old. I see this lesson all the time in children's shows. I mean, like, just, you got to stand up to the bully. Bullies thrive on fear. Well, it's true, right? I mean, it's a cliche for a reason. Modeling not being afraid, right? Um, when the bullies threaten to quit, which they always do, say, all right, when can I expect that resignation letter, right? When they threaten to report, I've reported myself to HR on a bully's behalf before, right? Like they threaten, I'm going to go to HR with this. I'm like, oh, don't worry, I'll file the paperwork, right? Like, just, I'm not scared of you, right? Like, and that, like, when your department sees you modeling that, it helps them realize that often, I mean, this is the other thing. Bullies tend to overestimate their ability and their influence. Um, and modeling that you're not afraid and you're just going to go about your job and giving up on fixing the behavior. I could go on and on, but this is a lesson that I've learned through trial by fire.
Well, and what you touched on, Ben, we know that's one of the biggest concerns, right? When somebody, if if truly thinking about should I go into administration, which in higher ed, most of the time the chair is kind of that gateway position, is they think about all of those times that they looked at their admin and said, you couldn't pay me enough. That's why you get the big bucks. It was probably because they were dealing with a difficult human.
Yeah.
And what you said, I want to touch on. You said some of the most rewarding things you've done is when you've addressed bullying behavior. I'm going to echo that. And if anyone listening is a little bit confused or thinks that's disingenuous, feel free to disagree. But the reason I echo that is because every time you address poor behavior, which is usually in the minority, even if it takes up all your
Yeah,
time, you
absolutely.
are sending the message to the majority that I care enough about you to do it, right? And I think personally that's why I feel rewarded because whether it's kindergarten, your first day in kindergarten or higher ed, you know who the playground bullies are.
Mhm.
And even if the most people don't stand up to them, when that is addressed in a professional way, that sends a message, hey, my chair cares about me,
Mhm.
is they care enough about this space. And what you said is in higher education it looks a little different, and we might not be able to eliminate, but you said you kind of box them in. Yeah, we can certainly reduce that behavior. And I'm really so thank you for touching on that, because it is very challenging, it is fearful, and it takes a great deal of courage to stand up to that. uh,
And one thing,
Go
if I can
ahead.
just say one thing too that I think is
Yeah.
important is, like one thing that bullies like to do is drive the discourse, right? What they usually like is having themselves be at the center of whatever's happening. And when you're talking about the courage, I mean, like, I have studied rhetoric, right, as a communication scholar. Like often, when I first thought, I thought I could argue bullies out of their positions. No, you can't, right? Whatever you say, you can you can provide solid evidence and it doesn't matter, right? And I had to realize you don't need to get into tit for tats with bullies, right? Thank them for their feedback and move on, right? Like, appreciate it. Thank you for your input. Okay, moving on to the next thing. You are not obligated, right? I remember I got this email from a bully one time, right? And I reached out to our faculty consultant, right? Like, and it's a laundry list of things that I had done wrong and, ways that I had ruined the department and how and I was like, how do I respond to this? And they were like, don't. And I said, well, what do you mean don't? And then they were like, well, there's nothing in the faculty handbook that says you're required to respond to these emails. And it just hadn't even occurred to me. I thought, oh, I'm a responsive leader. Of course, when someone in my team is going to like, I have an obligation to respond. I had to realize, no, you don't have an obligation to respond to bad faith demands for you to justify your decisions and your behaviors. Once again, not an excuse to hide behind your decisions for good faith questions, but when they're bad faith, just thank you and move on.
Thank you for sharing that. That's going to give a lot of our listeners permission to set that boundary. And in many ways, a non-response is a response.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, is when it comes down to it, if we're engaging in conflict, what's the worst that could happen? There isn't, like you said, there isn't a law. There isn't anything in any union contractor handbook that says thou must reply to every email. There
Yeah.
isn't a law or policy that says thou shall not upset or disappoint an otherwise educated, mature adult. You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I made the same mistakes too early on when I wanted to fix everything. I thought, that we could all kind of kumbaya and there would be this harmony. And you realize in a hurry that the other thing I say, that two things can be true. Somebody can be an excellent teacher, researcher, heck, the students can love them,
Yeah.
and at the same time perhaps be one of the most toxic people in the department. Two things can be true, right? So you learn all that when you become a chair. What are some other, there are so many, literally 100 things to talk about here. Um, Anything else here that you would like to highlight? I think our listeners, if they haven't already got out their phone or whatever they're listening on and bought the book, they will. Um, for
Let's
the two
hope,
or three
right?
people that still aren't convinced, what's a few other things they need to know about, Ben?
Well, I mean, some of the things we're talking about with the challenges and stuff, right? I mean, I don't want you to think that the whole book is about that, right? I mean, and also too, it's story based. There's a lot of stories in the book, which I think are pretty interesting in terms of from the outside things I would have never expected that chairs actually deal with. But it's not all negative. There's plenty of positive stuff in there as well. I mean, being a chair can be a pretty rewarding experience. Whenever someone asks me if they should do it, I always say, absolutely, you should do it. Um, I've grown a lot, like emotionally, and as a person, right? I mean, it's like teaching, right? I mean, after a while, I mean, not that like there aren't certain challenges associated with teaching, but it, it's not challenging in the same way as being a chair. I mean, you have all the authority in the classroom, for example, and you do it over and over again repeatedly, right? And you have to stretch, right, and grow new muscles when you become a department chair. And I think that's really productive, right? I mean, actually, I mean, I do have a chapter in there about teaching as chair because, I still teach classes as well. Often I find it like a nice break from being chair, right? You go in and those challenges aren't there. But you shouldn't run away from it just because there are challenges. And then the book also has plenty of things that are like a little more practical. I hate to use that word. It's all practical, right? But things that are a little more grounded, maybe. And they're not how-tos, but there are chapters on what to do with your burgeoning inbox, how to create an agenda for a department meeting, how you should approach budgeting, how to handle student appeals for grades, right? Um, Writing memos in the language of upper administration, right? Especially in terms of like getting resources and such. And, that's a big, also the difference between like mentoring senior faculty versus supporting part-time faculty, right? Like, so there's a lot in there about like other kind of things as well that, like I said, might be, um, like I said, I don't want to say practical, but right, like are a little more grounded in terms of like official duties that one might do as chair. But then there's also like a lot of the book is focused on things like the emotional labor of being chair. I had no idea going into it, right? How much the emotional component, right? You can be so good at all the other things, the budgeting, the scheduling, all of that, but um, and the mistakes that I've made at chair tend to come from me not doing the emotional labor the right way, getting hot-headed over something, right? For example, I remember one of the biggest lessons I ever learned in regards to the course schedule was like, I weaponized it one time, and I learned real quickly that I shouldn't do that, right? I had a faculty member who wouldn't show up to things, and then I sent an email saying, fine, well, now you have a Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., right? Like, so you have to be on campus, right? Well, I learned that's a really bad way to resolve a problem like that, right? Don't weaponize the schedule. Makes everyone start asking questions and wondering if they're what they should be reading into their schedule assignments and right, like those kind of things. So often that emotional and that kind of practical duty element of chair go hand in hand as well. So
Well, and again, as you say it, this truly spans the spectrum. Just looking at your topics here, yes, it is. I mean, you talk about relationships, you talk about mentoring, you talk about networking with other chairs. You said yourself teaching. Um, I mean, truly, if most of us chairs were to sit down and say, come up with your top 50, 100, whatever things that in real life you address, they're here, and it truly is just it's a nice handbook. Like he said, it's very similar to a devotional. Is you can read it 1 through 100, but you can also if you are struggling, like you said, I have a student conflict. Well, you know what? There's a chapter that's going to help you. There's some reflections and there's some research to back it up.
hmm.
And so to me, this is a perfect answer in many ways to how we talk in higher education, right? Is yes, for there's research to back it up, but then there's the practical side of this is how I did it. And Ben said it. I know in my writing, a lot of the things that I write about is probably because I did it wrong. And I'm saying, please don't
Oh
do this
yeah,
because we write the books that we wish we would have had. Is
yeah,
that fair? And
sure, yes. And my
and
mistakes are legion.
yeah,
They're plentiful.
and finally, as and I really enjoyed our time here. Um, it's safe to say you have a mentoring mindset. People can easily find you, your email, you're visible. I'll put your links in the show notes. But in addition, or because of that, you've already done some chair workshops. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe where to either learn more about that or contact you if people are interested?
Sure, yeah, and I mean the much of the content of the book stemmed from a chairs workshop that I had actually completed. But yeah, I'm scheduled to give several of these. Done a couple of them already. But so going in, you spend so much time on one of these books. You know that for sure, Chris, right? I mean, and you don't want it to just sail off into the ether, right? Um, it's really nice to engage people in these ideas. So I am in the process of, offering workshops to anyone who wants to bring me in. And these are not, right, like learn how to, budget through Excel or something like that. They're about the conversations that chairs should be having. So many of the conversations that we have as chair are focused on, oh, what are the enrollment numbers now? What's the calendar coming up, right? How are we dealing with this particular challenge, right? And we often don't kind of get an opportunity to focus globally on questions like, what does it mean to be a chair, right? What like how has your professional identity changed? How do you deal with things like the fact that your agenda is interrupted constantly? Um, right? How do we handle things like bullying, for example, right? How do you handle the demands of increased visibility, right? I mean, that was one thing that I noticed like real quickly. It's like people want to be seen. They need to see their department chair, right? I used to be able to go into my office and close the door and get done what I needed to get done. Can't do that anymore, right? And so like those kind of conversations, I think they've been really rewarding to have. I've really enjoyed them. And the once you get chairs talking about these things and give them this vocab, I mean, it, it conversation flows easily. And people are usually, because like I said, we just don't often have outlets to talk about these things with other people who understand, right? But they may understand it academically, but until you kind of put it in your body and lived it, you don't really understand some of those particular challenges. And then on top of all that, you got to navigate these vulnerabilities, and you also want to be good at your job. You want to increase enrollment, right? You want to be supportive of your faculty. You want to get those resources, right? You want to advocate for your faculty, right? And so that's really what the workshop is focused on. It's not like you're not going to leave, right? Like with a 4-step plan, right, to course scheduling. That's not what it's about. It's about opening up the conversation and having extended conversations with people, with other chairs that I facilitate. And I've loved it. It's been great.
And so if we have listeners that are interested, what would be the best way to reach out and connect with you, Ben?
Oh, just my University of Toledo email is
Okay.
wonderful, right? Or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm easily found on the internet.
Okay, and I will add those links here as well. Well, Ben, it has been wonderful. I know that those listening, this has been extremely beneficial. I don't care if you're thinking about being a chair, if you've been a chair, if you've been through the chair and now you're a dean or provost thinking about mentoring chairs. There is something here, and this is truly a unique approach in the chair literature right now that is daily. You mentioned it. It's a daily commitment. It's day to day. It's different. This will help you. So again, the new book out by Roman and Littlefield is The New Department Chair: 100 Daily Reflections for Mindfully Designing Your Term by Dr. Benjamin Myers. So, Ben, again, thank you for joining us on the Department Chair Leadership Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I love having these conversations, and I appreciate the work that you're doing out there in this regard. And like I said earlier, and I said this beforehand as well, is that, I think there are some problems out there with some of these how to be a department chair book, especially the survival metaphor. Your book does not fall into that trap, right? You talk about the reasons for doing it and how to thrive in the position rather than survive. And so I really appreciate your focus in the way that you approach these issues as well. So thanks for the opportunity to chat with you about it.
Well, hey, likewise, Ben, and again, thank you for contributing to the much needed literature on this. And to our listeners, as always, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you enjoyed this and it'll add value to you and those you serve. So until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. If you want to learn more about my leadership philosophy and how to be an effective chair, please consider my book, The Department Chair: A Practical Guide to Effective Leadership. You can find this and learn more about me by going to cjleadership.com. Also, please be sure to like this podcast, leave a review, and share with your colleagues. Thanks again for improving your organization and those you serve by improving yourself. Take care.